The gun was already out before the man said a single word in his own defense. Cold steel pressed against the temple of a black man on his knees on wet asphalt. His fingers were laced behind his head. His chin was bleeding where the pavement had caught him on the way down. Around him, paper grocery bags lay split open, their contents scattered across the parking lot in the October wind. A head of romaine, a rack of ribs still in the butcher's wrap, and one white cardboard bakery box slightly crushed now at one corner that he had held against his chest in the checkout line like it contained something that could not be replaced. From inside the SUV parked 4 feet away, a child was crying. Not the loud crying of a scraped knee. The quiet, broken sobbing of a boy who does not understand why the world has gone wrong. The officer standing over the man was red-faced, breathing hard, his gun hand trembling with an adrenaline he had built entirely out of his own assumptions. What Officer Craig Doyle did not know, what he had never bothered to find out, because he had not checked a single fact before drawing his weapon, was that the man whose face he had just driven into the asphalt had spent the last 6 years keeping the President of the United States alive. He would find out soon enough. It had started simply enough about 40 minutes earlier. It was 8:47 in the evening on a Thursday in late October, and the parking lot of the Millbrook Fresh Market was mostly empty at that hour. The sodium streetlights overhead gave everything that flat, yellowish glow that makes a parking lot feel familiar and slightly wrong at the same time, like a photograph taken in bad lighting. Marcus Webb pulled his midnight blue 2024 Tahoe into a space near the back of the lot, away from the cluster of shopping carts and the broken light that flickered near the entrance. He was exhausted. Not the exhaustion of physical effort, but the specific bone-deep tiredness that comes from 22 straight days of sustained professional vigilance, the kind that does not switch off cleanly when the assignment ends. He had landed at Dulles that afternoon after a classified protective detail he could not discuss outside of his team. He had driven 2 hours home through light traffic, and he had stopped at the Millbrook Fresh Market because tomorrow was Danny's 8th birthday, and there was no version of this evening where Marcus Webb showed up without a cake. He was dressed the way he always dressed when he was off the clock, a faded gray hoodie, dark jeans with a frayed left knee, scuffed running shoes. He looked tired. He looked ordinary. He looked like a father who had been away too long and was finally gratefully almost home. He carried 2 paper bags in his right arm, produce a rack of ribs he planned to put on the grill Saturday, and one carefully boxed double chocolate birthday cake that he had carried against his chest through the checkout line like it contained something irreplaceable, because it did. Danny Webb was 8 years old tomorrow, and he had absolutely no intention of sitting still about it. He was strapped into his booster seat in the second row of the Tahoe, a superhero comic book open across his lap, his legs kicking in the steady, unconscious rhythm of a child who cannot contain what he is feeling. His father had been gone 22 days. Danny had counted every one of them on a paper calendar taped to his bedroom wall, crossing off each square with a red marker before bed, the way his mom had taught him to make waiting feel like something you were doing instead of something being done to you. Marcus and Danny had a ritual. When Marcus came home from a trip that had kept him away more than 2 weeks, they stayed up late together, no matter the hour. Midnight, 1 in the morning, it did not matter eating cereal on the couch and watching old Western movies that Danny pretended to fully understand, and Marcus pretended to need to explain. It was theirs. It belonged to nobody else. Danny spotted his father through the window as Marcus came around the side of the Tahoe toward the trunk. He pressed his small hand flat against the glass and waved with his whole arm the way children wave with total commitment, nothing held back. Marcus saw him through the tinted glass and raised one of his grocery bags in a slow, clumsy wave back. Danny laughed. And for one moment, the parking lot was the best place in the world. Marcus set the birthday cake in the trunk first with both hands. He did not think about it anymore, the way his eyes moved when he entered a new space. 14 years had made it something closer to breathing than behavior. Automatic, continuous operating quietly underneath everything else. He noted the security camera above the Fresh Market entrance, fixed angle covering the lot's center lane, but not the back row where he had parked. He noted the gray minivan, 2 spaces over empty no threat. He noted the position of the working overhead light relative to Danny's door, and without consciously deciding to, he angled himself as he unloaded the groceries so that his body was between the light source and his son. Force of habit. The geometry of protection. Marcus Webb was a special agent with the United States Secret Service assigned to the Presidential Protective Division, 14 years in the field. The last 6 of those years spent within arm's reach of the most protected person on the planet on a near-daily basis. He held a federal security clearance that superseded every local law enforcement agency in the country. He had been trained in close-quarters combat threat assessment, emergency medicine, evasive driving, and a dozen other disciplines that most people would not believe were stored inside a man in a faded gray hoodie. He was thinking about none of it as he loaded his groceries. He was thinking about Danny's face when he saw the birthday cake. Then he heard it, the roar of a patrol car engine cutting hard and fast across the empty lot. No lights, no sirens, just raw, aggressive speed, the sound of a man who is not responding to a call but hunting for one. Every quiet instinct Marcus Webb owned came online at once. Craig Doyle was 43 years old and had been a patrol officer with the Millbrook Police Department for 14 years. In that time, he had accumulated 3 things in roughly equal measure: a reputation for getting results, a trail of excessive force complaints that had never stuck, and a deeply personal belief that this suburb belonged to him in a way that was non-negotiable. He was a thick man, not tall, but wide and solid, the kind of build that goes from athletic to something heavier when the discipline stops. His uniform shirt pulled across the gut in a way that he blamed on the department's supply ordering. His jaw had a permanent set to it, the jaw of a man who is always bracing for disrespect. And his eyes, pale, quick, restless, did not scan a room looking for threats. They scanned for targets. 11 excessive force complaints lived in his personnel file. Every single one had been resolved through union arbitration before it reached any review process with real teeth. Not one suspension, not one day of mandatory retraining, not one documented probation. To Doyle, this was proof the complaints were garbage. To anyone reading that file with clear eyes, it was proof of something else. Here is what Craig Doyle did when he thought nobody important was watching. He waited. He was parked that Thursday evening in the shadow of an abandoned dry cleaning storefront on the east edge of the Millbrook Fresh Market lot, killing the last 40 minutes of his shift eating a gas station sandwich, listening to a talk radio program that ran entirely on grievance. He was the particular kind of bored that made him dangerous. He saw the Tahoe first. Midnight blue, new model, immaculate. Then he saw Marcus. The calculation in his head took less than 3 seconds. Not a single part of it was accurate. But Craig Doyle had never once let accuracy slow him down. He did not activate his overhead lights. Lights gave people time to prepare, time to think, time to remember their rights. Doyle preferred the element of surprise the way sudden aggressive presence knocked people off balance before they could gather themselves. He had been doing it for 14 years, and it had always worked before. He threw the cruiser into drive and accelerated hard across 3 empty parking lanes, hit the brakes 4 feet from the Tahoe's rear bumper, and the screech of rubber on pavement cracked through the quiet of the October night like something breaking. Marcus flinched at the sound, not away from it, but toward it. He turned with trained deliberateness. His body squared. His eyes began working immediately. Doyle was already out of the cruiser. His hand was already on the retention strap of his holster. He had not called the stop into dispatch. He had not run the Tahoe's plates. He had not verified one single thing about the man standing at the open trunk or the vehicle or the grocery bags in plain sight in the cargo area. He had looked at a black man loading a luxury SUV in a parking lot at night, and he had decided in 3 seconds that he already knew everything worth knowing. He was wrong about every part of it. But he was walking forward, and the hand was already moving toward the gun, and the night was about to change completely. "Hands where I can see them. Step away from the vehicle. Now." Doyle's voice hit the empty parking lot loud and hard, the voice of a man who uses volume the way other men use arguments to end conversations before they start. Marcus raised both hands to chest height, palms out, and held them there. "Evening, officer." Low, steady, unhurried. "My hands are right here. Is there something I can help you with?" The composure infuriated Doyle in a way that showed on his face. He was used to a specific kind of response from the people he stopped, the scrambling, over-apologetic compliance of someone who is genuinely frightened. Marcus Webb was not frightened. He was patient, and to Craig Doyle that kind of dignity felt exactly like disrespect. "Whose vehicle is this?" Doyle stepped in close, using his size to take up space. "It's my vehicle. The registration is in the glove compartment. My ID is in my front right pocket. Tell me which you want first, and I'll get it for you." Doyle looked at the Tahoe, looked at Marcus, looked at the Tahoe again. Then he said something that he said the way he said all of his worst things, casually, as if it required no thought at all, because for him, it genuinely didn't. "Right, because guys like you are always just loading groceries." He let that sit for a half-second. "Hands on the vehicle. Spread your feet." Marcus placed his hands on the edge of the open trunk. He said nothing. But he noted the phrase. He noted the tone. He noted exactly what Craig Doyle had just revealed about himself, and he filed it precisely. The window came down slowly. Danny was not quite strong enough to crank it all the way without effort, and his face appeared in the gap. 8 years old, eyes wide, his superhero comic still clutched to his chest, his legs no longer kicking. Dad. Small, uncertain. The word of a child who senses that the world has shifted but cannot yet name how. "Are you in trouble? Are we going home?" "Stay in your seat, bud." Marcus turned his head just slightly, keeping both hands visible on the trunk. "Everything is fine. I'll be right there." "I didn't tell you to speak to him," Doyle snapped. He moved a half-step left to put himself back in Marcus's direct line of sight. Then he looked at the SUV window and said it the way he said everything cruel easily without ceremony. "You better keep that kid quiet or I'll make a call tonight and somebody else will be putting him to bed." Something changed in Marcus's face when those words landed. Nothing visible moved, jaw still set, hands still open on the trunk, breathing still measured. But something behind his eyes went very still and very cold, the way a room goes still when someone enters it who should not be there. He did not look at Doyle with anger. He looked at him with the complete focused attention of a man who has just decided to remember everything about this moment in this order for as long as necessary. It was the turn of Marcus's head toward Danny that Doyle chose to read as evasion, though it was nothing of the kind. And what came next happened with a speed that had nothing to do with what had actually occurred between them. The Glock came out of the holster in one motion, 18 inches from Marcus's left temple. "On the ground, face down, right now." Time did not stop for Marcus Webb. But it clarified the way a room clarifies when the lights come fully up, every edge suddenly sharp and specific. He saw the trigger finger inside the guard, not resting outside it. He saw the tremor in Doyle's wrist, fine rapid adrenaline-driven, and recognized it as the signature of a man who is more frightened than angry, which made him more dangerous than fury ever would. He calculated in the clinical way that 14 years of training had made genuinely involuntary that he could take the weapon in under 3 seconds. He did not do it, because Danny was 4 feet behind him, separated by 1 layer of glass, and any physical struggle with a man holding a loaded weapon at close range produced exactly 1 variable. Marcus Webb was not willing to accept the possibility of a round traveling in his son's direction. He went to his knees on the wet asphalt, deliberately, smoothly, announcing every movement before he made it the way he had been trained to do when the situation required the other person to believe they were in control. The pavement was cold and gritty. The smell of motor oil and old rain came up from the blacktop. And somewhere behind him, barely audible through the glass, Danny was saying his name. Doyle came forward fast and planted his knee between Marcus's shoulder blades with enough force to drive him flat. The asphalt caught Marcus's chin on the way down and opened a thin line of skin that began bleeding immediately against the cold pavement. The handcuffs went on behind his back in 2 fast motions, and Doyle ratcheted them past the legal limit, past the department standard of 1 finger's width clearance, down to maximum constriction, tight enough that Marcus could feel his own pulse trapped in the metal. Doyle crouched over him, and then he did the thing that Marcus would think about for a long time afterward. Not the gun, not the knee, not the cuffs, but this. He put his mouth close to Marcus's ear and said very quietly in a tone that was almost conversational, "Where's your fancy lawyer now, huh? Nobody's coming for you tonight?" He laughed at his own joke. A short, ugly sound. Danny was crying. Quiet, confused, sobbing from inside the SUV, the sound of a child trying to understand something that will not make sense, no matter how many times he turns it over. Marcus turned his head slightly toward the car window. His voice came out completely level. "I'm okay." He was not okay. His shoulder was already transmitting serious damage. His chin was bleeding onto the asphalt. His son was 11 feet away crying his name, but he was counting every breath, cataloging every violation in exact sequence. And somewhere in the back of his mind, one quiet thought surfaced, and then went still. Danny's birthday cake was still in the trunk. Officer Pete Solis had been with the Millbrook Department for 8 months, and he was still at the stage of his career where his instincts were louder than his conditioning. He pulled his cruiser into the lot as the secondary unit stepped out and took in the scene in about 4 seconds. Split grocery bags on the ground, a child's face pressed against the SUV window, red-eyed watching. A man in handcuffs who was bleeding from the chin, whose posture, even face down and restrained, communicated something that car thieves generally did not communicate, a kind of controlled interior stillness that belonged to a very different category of person. None of this felt right to Solis. He was 26 years old and had not yet learned to argue himself out of what felt right. "What do we have?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral. "Grand theft auto," Doyle said easily. The words came out smooth, well-worn, the fluency of long practice. "He got aggressive on approach, suspected hostile. We're taking him in. I need you to wait on the tow and call child services for the minor." Marcus turned to Solis directly. He made full eye contact. When he spoke, his voice dropped to its most precise professional register. Not a request, a clear set of instructions. "Officer Solis, my name is Marcus Webb. My wife's name is Diane Webb. Her number is in my cell phone left front pocket. Before you call anyone else, you call her, and you tell her that Danny is safe and someone needs to come pick him up. Do you understand what I'm asking you?" Solis looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "Yes, sir," and he meant it. Doyle grabbed Marcus by the back of the collar and moved him toward the cruiser. The back seat of a patrol cruiser is designed to be uncomfortable in ways that are not quite subtle. Hard molded plastic. No interior handles. The wire mesh partition that separates you from the officer in front, which is not just a physical barrier, but an architectural statement about who holds power in this arrangement. Marcus sat in it for 18 minutes with his hands cuffed behind his back and his shoulder sending continuous sharp signals of damage. He said nothing. Doyle filled the silence himself. He talked the way men talk when they want to wound someone without making an explicit threat. An ongoing monologue delivered to the rearview mirror about the neighborhood and the kind of people who actually lived there, and the kind of people who showed up from outside thinking they could take whatever they wanted. He had the easy, explanatory tone of a man teaching a slow student something obvious. He seemed to find it genuinely satisfying. Marcus listened to every word. He also listened to what Doyle was not saying. Doyle had not called the stop into dispatch before approaching. He had not run the plates at any point during the stop. The impound order had been called in before any stolen vehicle report had been verified. The 3 charges announced over the radio included 1 assault on an officer for which there was no supporting incident whatsoever. Every violation was cataloged, every procedural failure noted, every fabricated detail filed in the exact order it had occurred. And then one thought moved quietly through everything else, surfaced briefly, and went still again. Danny's birthday cake was still in the trunk. The underground garage of the Millbrook precinct smelled of motor oil and the particular brand of burnt acrid coffee that seems to exist only in police stations, a smell that soaks into the walls over years until it becomes part of the building itself. Doyle walked Marcus through the security doors with one hand on his collar, not guiding gripping, and announced their arrival to the bullpen with the energy of a man who has caught something worth showing off. A few officers glanced up. Some offered Doyle the small, knowing smirks of colleagues who had learned not to ask questions about what he brought in. Most looked back at their paperwork within seconds. That return to paperwork was its own kind of answer about what this room had learned to tolerate. Behind the elevated booking desk, Captain Frank Harmon was reviewing arrest reports, reading glasses at the end of his nose, 61 years old. 34 years on the job. He had the contained, weathered air of a man who had decided long ago to maintain the procedural correctness of his own corner while choosing not to examine what happened in the corners he could not see from his desk. "Grand theft auto," Doyle announced, stepping Marcus to the booking counter. "Resisting arrest, assault on an officer." He added that last charge the way he added all his invented charges automatically without pause. The way you add a condiment you always use without thinking about it anymore. Marcus did not look at Doyle. He looked at Harmon. Directly, steadily, with the unhurried patience of a man who knows that the next few minutes are going to be very important and intends to be fully present for all of them. "Empty his pockets," Harmon said, not looking up from the intake form he had begun. Routine, procedural. The 10,000th time he had said those words. Doyle reached into the left pocket first and came out with Marcus's cell phone screen still lit, showing a missed call from a contact saved simply as Diane. Then he moved to the right pocket, the one Marcus had specified from the first moment of the stop, the one he had told Doyle contained his identification clearly and precisely back in the parking lot, before any of this had been necessary. What Doyle's hand found was not a standard wallet. He registered this before he could name it a weight that was wrong, a density that did not match what he expected. It was matte black, reinforced at the edges, no branding, no logos, slightly wider than a normal billfold, the kind of object that communicated even without being opened that it had been constructed with a specific purpose that went beyond carrying cards and cash. Doyle pulled it out. His smirk was still in place, the comfortable, settled smirk of a man who believes he is about to be confirmed right about something. He flipped it open. The smirk lasted 1 second. Then it was gone as completely as if it had been removed by hand, not fading, not shifting, just simply no longer there. Replaced by an expression that was not quite any specific thing, but that contained somewhere underneath it the first distant tremors of what was coming. The bullpen did not go quiet gradually. It went quiet the way a room goes quiet when a fire alarm is pulled. Not a lowering of sound, not a hush, but a sudden total physical absence of noise, as if someone had cut a wire. A phone ringing at the far end of the room rang twice more into the silence, and then stopped mid-ring. The officer 2 desks over, who had been typing, paused with his fingers resting on the keys and did not resume. Even the ventilation system seemed to hold its breath. Everyone in that room oriented without deciding to toward the booking desk. toward Doyle's face, which was doing something none of them had seen it do before. What Craig Doyle was holding in his trembling hands was a 5-pointed gold star shield, heavy, ornate. The seal of the United States worked into its center with federal-grade precision, not a novelty, not a replica, but the genuine, substantial weight of actual institutional authority. Mounted beside it in the same leather case, a laminated federal photo identification card bearing Marcus Webb's photograph, his full name, and across the top in bold, unambiguous black lettering, United States Secret Service, Special Agent Marcus Webb, Presidential Protective Division. Doyle's mouth opened. Nothing came out. He looked at the badge. He looked at Marcus. He looked back at the badge the way a person looks at something a second and third time, when they are hoping the information will change if they look long enough. His hands were shaking, visibly continuously shaking, the gold shield catching the fluorescent light at a different angle, with each small tremor throwing it back across the room like an accusation that kept moving. Captain Harmon came down from the elevated booking desk, not running, but moving with the controlled urgency of a man who has just calculated the exact size of the disaster he is standing in, and took the wallet from Doyle's hands. Doyle did not resist the transfer. He could not have resisted anything at that moment. Harmon read the identification card. Then he read it again, lips barely moving. Then he looked up at the man he had been preparing to book for Grand Theft Auto. The man with the dried blood on his chin, the man with the purpling handcuff marks on his wrists, the man in the faded gray hoodie who had been standing in a parking lot loading a birthday cake into his own SUV. Marcus Webb spoke for the first time since entering the precinct. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He spoke at a level that was almost quiet, and somehow every word landed harder than shouting ever could. He named the unlawful detention. He named the weapon drawn without cause, without verification, without a single procedural step being followed. He named all 3 fabricated charges in sequence with specificity, and noted that the third had no supporting incident of any kind. He named the physical force, the deliberate over-tightening of the restraints in violation of department policy. He noted that his 8-year-old son had been present throughout and had been directly threatened by the officer regarding child protective services. He said all of this in precise sequential order. Then he stopped speaking and waited. Keys. Harmon said the word the way you say a word when it is the only one left. Give me the keys, Doyle. Doyle moved his hand toward his duty belt. His fingers found the key ring, and then dropped it. The small silver ring hit the precinct floor, and the sound of it, sharp, metallic bouncing once in the complete silence of the room, was somehow the most clarifying sound the night had produced. More clarifying than the gun. More clarifying than the handcuffs. Because this was Craig Doyle stripped of his performance, stripped of his certainty, unable to manage the basic mechanical task of holding on to his own keys. He bent and picked them up, tried to find the right key with fingers that were not cooperating. The keys moved against each other in a continuous small rattle that every person in that bullpen could hear. He tried to insert the key into the lock on Marcus's cuffs. It did not catch on the first attempt. Or the second. The entire precinct watched Craig Doyle fail to unlock a pair of handcuffs twice in silence. On the third attempt, the key caught. The cuffs came free. Marcus brought his arms forward slowly and deliberately, the movement of a man in real pain, and looked at his wrists. The steel had left deep purple-edged rings in a full band around each wrist, the mark of cuffs applied with intent rather than carelessness. He studied them for a moment the way a person examines something they intend to present later. Then he looked at Doyle, just looked at him steady, complete without a word. He picked up his badge wallet from the desk, snapped it shut with a single clean motion, and put it in his front pocket. Then he took out his phone. He dialed from memory. Not the field office line, not dispatch. A direct encrypted number that bypassed every intermediate layer and connected him immediately to the one person whose response would be both personal and operationally final. Agent Victor Reeves picked up on the second ring. 6 years as Marcus's direct supervisor. He answered the way he answered everything, immediately and completely present. Marcus kept it short. Location, time of stop, officer's name, department, violations in order without editorializing. Then, my son was present for all of it. He's 8 years old. My wife is retrieving him from the scene now. A pause. 4 seconds. Are you injured? Yes. Wrists, shoulder, chin laceration. Another pause. Shorter this time. Then Reeves said, seal the exits. Nobody leaves, nobody touches a terminal. Nobody makes an outbound call. We are 20 minutes out. He paused one final time. You did the right thing staying on your knees in that parking lot. I know, Marcus said. He hung up. He turned to Harmon, who was standing behind the booking desk with the expression of a man watching a building fall and still calculating which way to run. Nobody leaves this building, Marcus said. His voice carried the authority of a man who is accustomed to being obeyed when it is important. Nobody touches a keyboard. Nobody makes a call out. Can you do that, Captain? Harmon said yes. Then he went and did it. And Craig Doyle stood at the edge of the room watching the handcuffed man he had arrested 45 minutes ago seal his own precinct from the inside out, and something in his chest began to understand slowly, horrifyingly, what had actually happened tonight. The street outside the Millbrook precinct did not transform the way things transform in movies with sirens and chaos and shouting. It transformed the way federal resources transform a situation when they are applied by people who do not need to perform their authority because they simply have it. The vehicles arrived in sequence. 4 unmarked black Suburbans, 1 armored tactical unit, no lights running because none were necessary. The agents who stepped out moved with the unhurried, organized certainty of people who are not rushing because the situation is already completely under their control. Agent Victor Reeves came through the front doors of the Millbrook precinct and crossed the bullpen without acknowledging a single local officer heading directly to Marcus. He was tall, mid-50s, gray at the temples, with the kind of face that has learned to project authority so completely that expression has become optional. He looked at Marcus's wrists. He looked at the cut on his chin. He asked quietly, "Medical, now or after?" "After," Marcus said. Reeves nodded. Then he turned, and the shift in his attention changed the temperature of the room. He looked at Craig Doyle, who had not moved from his position against the booking desk, who had been standing there for 20 minutes with the stillness of a man who has run out of things to try, and what crossed Reeves's face was not anger. It was something colder than anger. The expression of a man who has identified a problem and is now determining methodically how to dismantle it completely. 2 agents moved to Doyle's flanks. They stripped his duty weapon from the holster, his spare magazines, his taser. And then one of them reached up to Doyle's chest and unclipped his badge, not with drama, not with ceremony, but simply the way you remove something that no longer belongs where it is. Doyle's knees bent. He sat down in an office chair that happened to be behind him without being told to and put his face in his hands. He tried. One more time. The last coherent move Craig Doyle made as a man who still believed he had options. He lifted his face from his hands and directed himself toward Reeves, his voice attempting to find something of its professional register, not quite getting there, the words coming out thin and slightly too fast. The vehicle had matched a general profile he'd been monitoring. The driver had been non-compliant on approach. Given the time of night and the circumstances, any officer operating on reasonable suspicion would have Reeves listened to all of it without moving, without changing expression, without interrupting once. When Doyle finished, Reeves turned to Marcus and asked one question. "Did he run your plates before he approached you?" "He did not," Marcus said. Reeves turned back to Doyle. "You approached that man," he said quietly and without decoration, "and you drew your service weapon on him without verifying one single thing. You fabricated 3 charges. The third one has no supporting incident of any kind. And you did all of this in front of an 8-year-old child." He paused for exactly 1 beat. "Is there anything you'd like to add?" There was not. The last air went out of Craig Doyle as visibly as air leaves anything that has been punctured, not dramatically, not with noise, just steadily, until what remained was smaller and less substantial than what it had been. He had nothing left. The federal warrant arrived telephonically inside 15 minutes. A magistrate reached at home the paperwork completed and transmitted before Doyle had fully registered it was happening. 2 agents with gloved hands and evidence bags began working the patrol car in the precinct garage. Methodical, quiet, the kind of thorough that leaves nothing. They found the lockbox beneath the trunk liner. Heavy combination lock, 30 seconds with the right tool. They laid the contents on a clean evidence sheet under the garage's fluorescent lights and cataloged them without comment the way professionals catalog things that speak for themselves. 7 blank vehicle title documents, 3 different states. 11 prepaid burner phones, several with recent activity. $47,000 in banded cash. And a wire-bound ledger, its pages dense with handwriting, dates, vehicle makes, and models, dollar amounts, and initials that were not Craig Doyle's alone. Reeves carried the ledger back into the precinct and held it open in front of Marcus without saying anything. He let Marcus read for a moment, then he spoke. He wasn't operating out of bias alone. He was running an operation. He used profiling as a targeting method, identifying Black and Hispanic drivers in high-value vehicles, manufacturing justification for stops and seizures, and moving the vehicles to a chop shop out of state. 23 months. 31 documented targets. He paused. "You were not a victim of a bad cop tonight, Marcus. You were selected by a criminal enterprise that had learned to hide behind a badge." Marcus read one more entry in the ledger. Then he closed it carefully and handed it back. He did not say anything for a moment. Then, "How many of the 31 had someone to call?" Reeves held his gaze. "None of them," he said. The ledger was 31 pages long, and each page was a person. Federal investigators worked through it over the following 72 hours, cross-referencing entries against department records, DMV databases, and reports from neighboring jurisdictions. What they built from that cross-reference was not a surprise, so much as a confirmation, the shape of something that had been operating in plain sight for nearly 2 years, quiet and methodical, disguised as police work. Every stop in the ledger involved a Black or Hispanic male driver in a vehicle valued above $60,000. Every stop had been conducted on a stretch of road Doyle had specifically requested to patrol, a written request submitted 3 months after he joined the department, renewed annually, never questioned. Of the 31 stops, 29 had never been properly entered into the department's arrest management system. They existed in radio transmissions and nowhere else. 6 of the vehicles Doyle had impounded were later reported stolen by their owners. The impound company had no record of receiving them. They had not gone to impound. They had gone somewhere the ledger's initials pointed to, and those initials belonged to more than one person. Marcus received the full summary from Reeves in a federal conference room, sitting across a table with a cup of coffee he had not touched. He listened without interrupting. When Reeves finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, "How long before the night in the parking lot?" "The first entry is dated 23 months before your stop," Reeves said. Marcus nodded slowly. He was thinking about 31 entries. 31 men who had stood beside their own vehicles on the side of a road or in a parking lot, not knowing what was actually happening, not knowing that the man walking toward them had already decided the outcome. 31 men who had not had a federal badge in their pocket. Most of them had lost something: their car, their money, in some cases their freedom. He sat with that for a while. The Millbrook Police Union representative arrived at 11:15 that night. His name was Gerald. He was stocky experienced, and he walked into that precinct with the settled confidence of a man who had successfully defended officers with files far thicker than Doyle's, and who had come to believe over 20 years that this particular kind of problem was always solvable if you knew the right pressure points. He reviewed the evidence list. 40 seconds. He looked at the ledger briefly. 30 seconds. Then he looked at Craig Doyle, who was sitting alone against the wall of the booking area, no longer crying, no longer attempting to speak, occupying the specific silence of a person who has exhausted every option he thought he had. Gerald closed his briefcase. He straightened his jacket with 2 precise tugs. Then he said to Doyle in the measured tone of someone communicating a formal organizational position, "The union is not in a position to provide representation in a matter involving federal racketeering. That falls outside the scope of our coverage agreement." He paused, then added almost as an afterthought, "I'm sorry, Craig." He walked out without looking back. Doyle watched him go. Gerald had been the last wall, and the last wall had just closed its own door from the outside quietly, without drama, leaving Craig Doyle alone on his side of it, with nothing between him and the full accounting of what he had done for 23 months, while apparently genuinely believing that it would never catch up to him. The room felt different after Gerald left, smaller, more honest. Captain Frank Harmon sat across from 2 federal investigators in his own conference room and answered every question they put to him, and he answered honestly. And he knew while he was doing it that honesty was the only currency he had left that was worth anything. He confirmed the 11 complaints. He confirmed that every one had been resolved through union arbitration before reaching any review process with consequences. He confirmed that he had been aware of the pattern and had not escalated it. When the investigators asked him directly whether the pattern had communicated something he should have acted on, he said yes. He didn't qualify it. He didn't add context to soften it. He just said yes. The investigators made clear that Harmon was not a criminal target. They also made clear that the department would be entering a period of mandatory federal oversight and that every arrest Doyle had filed across 14 years would be reviewed. Harmon would cooperate fully. He agreed. Then he said one thing that was not an answer to a direct question. He said it to the room, not to the investigators. Specifically, "I looked away from things I shouldn't have looked away from. I told myself it wasn't my corner. That's on me." The investigators noted it. The room was quiet for a moment. Nobody argued with him. He walked out of the precinct at 1:14 in the morning. The air had turned genuinely cold, the kind of October cold that has a clarity to it that makes everything feel slightly more real than it did before. Diane's car was idling at the curb with the heat already running. Marcus opened the passenger door and got in. Not the driver's seat, the passenger seat. He sat down and let the door close, and the warmth of the car and the familiar smell of Diane's perfume and the ordinary quiet sound of the heater running were so completely normal that for a moment he did not say anything at all. Diane did not ask what had happened. She knew some of it. She would know all of it later. But she had been married to Marcus Webb for 11 years, and she understood without needing. It explained that right now what he needed was not a question. She put her hand over his. "Is Danny asleep?" Marcus said. Finally. He waited up as long as he could. Marcus leaned his head back against the headrest, closed his eyes. They drove home through empty streets without speaking, and it was more than enough. The federal district courthouse was a different kind of building entirely. The ceilings were high. The wood was dark mahogany. The air conditioning ran at the aggressive chill of a room that wants you to understand you are somewhere serious. The federal seal mounted behind the judge's bench did not announce itself. It simply existed, and the weight of it was felt by everyone in the room without anyone having to mention it. Marcus sat in the front row of the gallery in a charcoal suit. No badge visible. Nothing to identify him as anything other than a man who was here because something had happened to him and to his family, and he had come to see it addressed. Diane sat to his left. Danny sat to his right, 9 years old now, in a button-down shirt he had chosen himself, because he understood in the way that children sometimes understand important things more clearly than adults do that this was a day that mattered. He was holding his father's hand with both of his own. At the defense table, Craig Doyle presented the specific transformation that 14 months of federal proceedings produces in a man who had built his entire identity on the belief that he was untouchable. He was thin, the weight had come off his frame, and the suit he wore had belonged to the larger version of himself that no longer existed. His shoulders curved slightly inward. His eyes stayed on the table. He did not look at the gallery, did not look at the bench, did not look anywhere that would require encountering another person's gaze. His court-appointed attorney sat beside him, organized and honest, his work thorough and his outcome already determined. Judge Patricia Moore had been on the federal bench for 19 years. She was known among the attorneys who appeared before her for a quality that was less common than it should have been in a person of her authority. She said exactly what she meant with precision and without decoration. And then she stopped talking. She addressed Doyle directly. She addressed 3 things in order. The first, a loaded weapon drawn on a man who had done nothing based on nothing but what that man looked like and what he was driving while that man's 8-year-old son was 4 feet away. The second, 14 years of a badge used not as public trust but as a criminal instrument deployed against 31 people who had done nothing to deserve it, most of whom would never fully recover what Craig Doyle had taken from them. The third, a 23-month criminal enterprise methodically constructed and carefully concealed, which had continued operating because it had learned to wear the uniform of law enforcement. The sentence, 3 federal convictions, 252 months, 21 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. No parole. Municipal pension permanently stripped. Full financial restitution ordered to every identified victim in the ledger. Judge Moore set down her papers, picked up her gavel, and said with the finality of someone who has said everything that needed to be said, "Court is adjourned." The gavel came down. 2 federal marshals took Craig Doyle's arms and turned him toward the center aisle. He walked in the small, careful steps that leg shackles require, and the chains made a sound on the marble floor, with each step quiet, continuous, unhurried, and that sound carried in the high-ceilinged room longer than it should have. As he passed the front row, his eyes came up. Found Marcus across the short distance between them. He looked the way a person looks when they have finally completely run out of anything left to try. Not angry, not pleading, just emptied out all the way down. Marcus held the eye contact. He did not look away. There was nothing in his expression, no satisfaction, no anger, no performance. He simply looked back steadily the way you look at something that is finished. Doyle looked away first. The door closed behind him. That evening, Marcus Webb sat at his kitchen table wearing the same faded gray hoodie he had been wearing 14 months ago in a parking lot because it was his favorite and he saw no reason that should change. Diane was at the counter pressing 10 candles into a double chocolate cake she had made herself. The original one, the one Marcus had carried against his chest through the checkout line and set so carefully in the trunk of his Tahoe, had been logged into federal evidence within 2 hours of that night and was in a storage facility somewhere. That was fine. This one was better. Diane had made it. Danny came downstairs in his pajamas with his hair going in 3 directions, pulled out the chair across from his father with the decisive energy of a boy who knows where he is supposed to be, and sat down. Marcus struck the match. The candles caught one by one in the quiet kitchen. Danny looked at the flames. Then he looked at his father. Then he pulled in one long breath and blew out every candle at once, cleanly, the way he had been trying to do since he was old enough to understand that was the point. "Did you make a wish?" Marcus asked. Danny looked at him across the small curl of smoke rising from 10 dark wicks. "I already got what I wanted," he said. simple, certain, the way children sometimes say enormous things. Marcus put his hand over his son's and left it there. Craig Doyle entered a federal penitentiary the following winter. He will not be eligible for any consideration of release until he is well past 60 years old. The 31 people documented in his ledger were contacted by federal investigators. Their cases were reviewed. Several who had received criminal convictions based on Doyle's manufactured stops had those convictions vacated. For most of them, it was the first time the system had moved in their direction. The Millbrook Police Department entered a mandatory federal oversight period. Every arrest Craig Doyle had filed across 14 years was audited. Captain Frank Harmon retired at the end of the year. Gerald, the union representative who had closed his briefcase and walked out without looking back, never took another police union case. None of it made the front page. Most real accountability doesn't. Marcus Webb returned to full active duty 6 weeks after the incident. He never gave an interview. He never made a statement. The courtroom had spoken, and that was enough. Every morning when Danny came downstairs for breakfast and sat across the table from his father, alive, safe, and entirely ordinary, that was more than enough. That was everything. If this story stayed with you, if you felt what it means to be on your knees in a parking lot when you've done nothing wrong, or what it means to have someone come through that door for you when it matters most, then you already understand why stories like this need to be told. Hit the like button, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss what comes next.